The city was alive with energy as the evening rolled in, casting a golden hue over the streets of Portland, Maine. People strolled along the cobblestone sidewalks, drawn to the aroma of fresh seafood wafting from the high-end restaurants dotting the old port district. Among them stood Monarch Bistro, a restaurant famed for its exclusivity and carefully curated dining experience. The windows gleamed under soft, warm lights, and the faint hum of chatter and clinking glasses gave the impression of a place where reservations were as precious as gold. Inside, the bistro was less crowded than usual. Only a few tables were occupied, the quiet murmur of diners blending with the faint piano music playing in the background. The host, a young woman with sharp features and an air of indifference, stood by the podium, scrolling through her tablet. The restaurant's glass doors opened, and a tall, well-dressed black man walked in. His charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, his polished shoes catching the light with every step. He paused, scanning the room with an air of quiet confidence, then approached the host. "Good evening," he said, his tone warm and polite. "I'd like a table for one." The host barely glanced up. She flicked her gaze to the screen in front of her, then back at him, her brow slightly furrowed. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked curtly. "No, but it looks like you've got plenty of space," he replied, gesturing subtly toward the half-empty room. The host pursed her lips, her fingers tapping the screen. She glanced over her shoulder at a colleague before leaning closer to the man. "I'm sorry," she said flatly, "but we're fully booked tonight." For a moment he stood there, studying her face. His expression didn't falter, but there was a brief flicker in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or something deeper. He didn't argue. Instead, he gave a small nod and said, "Thank you for your time." As he turned to leave, the faint sound of whispers followed him. One waiter leaned toward another, muttering under his breath, "He doesn't look like the type to dine here, does he?" The other chuckled, shaking his head. Outside, the man paused on the sidewalk, pulling out his phone. He typed something quickly, his demeanor calm, almost measured. With one last glance at the restaurant, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked away, his footsteps fading into the rhythm of the city. Inside the bistro, life carried on as usual. Plates were served, wine glasses were refilled, and laughter floated through the air. No one paid much attention to the brief exchange at the door, but if they had, they might have noticed something about the man's departure, a quiet assurance, as if he already knew the story wasn't over. As the man disappeared into the night, the staff at Monarch Bistro returned to their usual routines, but whispers lingered in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. The host, Lauren, leaned against the podium, her gaze fixed on her tablet screen, but her thoughts elsewhere. "Who even shows up here without a reservation?" she muttered under her breath. Behind her, a waiter named Ethan smirked as he folded a crisp white napkin. "Seriously, did you see his suit? Not exactly our typical clientele." Lauren shrugged, giving a dismissive laugh. "Maybe he thought he could charm his way in. Happens all the time." The other staff exchanged knowing glances, the subtle reinforcement of a shared assumption. They didn't say it outright, but the subtext hung in the air, unspoken yet loud. To them, the man's presence had been an anomaly, someone who didn't quite fit the image they projected for their clientele. In the kitchen, the sous chef, Rebecca, was plating a dish when she overheard the murmurs drifting in. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped closer to the swinging door, catching snippets of the conversation. "Come on, you guys," she interjected, her voice carrying just enough weight to quiet the chatter. "You don't know anything about him. Maybe he's someone important." Ethan laughed a little too loudly. "Yeah, sure. Maybe he's a CEO or something." His tone was dripping with sarcasm. Rebecca's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing more. She turned back to her station, her thoughts simmering alongside the dishes she prepared. In her years at Monarch Bistro, she'd seen this kind of casual dismissal before. It always left a bad taste in her mouth. Meanwhile, at the bar, a couple seated nearby had overheard bits of the exchange. The woman, a sharp-eyed professional in her mid-30s, leaned toward her companion. "Did you catch that?" she asked, her voice low. The guy they turned away. He looked important. Her date shrugged, swirling the wine in his glass. "Doesn't matter. This place has a reputation for being selective." "Selective?" she repeated, her brow arching. "You mean snobbish?" He chuckled. "Call it what you want. That's part of the appeal, isn't it?" The woman frowned but didn't respond, turning her attention back to her scallops. The conversation faded into the background, becoming just another thread in the fabric of the restaurant's evening. Hours later, as the bistro closed for the night, Lauren recounted the incident to the owner, Stephen Harper. A tall man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair, Stephen had built Monarch Bistro from the ground up, priding himself on its exclusivity and prestige. "Just another walk-in," Lauren said, brushing it off as she locked the front door. "Nothing out of the ordinary." Stephen nodded, distracted as he reviewed the night's earnings. "Good. We have an image to maintain." Neither of them gave the man a second thought as they finished their tasks and left the restaurant. But what none of them realized was that the brief encounter at the door had set something much larger in motion, something that would soon disrupt the carefully crafted facade of Monarch Bistro. 3 days later, Stephen Harper sat in his office, sipping his morning coffee as the sunlight streamed through the large windows. It was his usual routine: check emails, review reservations, and scan for any media mentions of Monarch Bistro. The restaurant had garnered glowing reviews in the past, solidifying its status as one of Portland's finest establishments. But today, as he scrolled through his emails, his eye caught a subject line that made him pause. "Fine dining or fine discrimination? A food critic's experience at Monarch Bistro." Stephen's stomach tightened. He clicked on the link, and the article loaded on the website of a prominent food and culture magazine. The byline read, "Christopher Ellis," a name he instantly recognized. Ellis was one of the most influential food critics in the country, his reviews capable of making or breaking a restaurant. Stephen began to read, his coffee forgotten on the desk. Monarch Bistro is known for its exclusivity, but what happens when exclusivity crosses the line into discrimination? My recent experience at this restaurant offers a disturbing glimpse. On a quiet evening, I decided to test the hospitality of this establishment without a reservation. Upon arrival, I was promptly turned away by the host, despite the restaurant being noticeably less than full. I observed the subtle glances, the dismissive tone, and the unspoken assumption that I didn't belong. I walked away without argument, but not without curiosity. Over the next few days, I ordered several dishes from Monarch Bistro for delivery, anonymously, of course. The food was undeniably exquisite, a testament to the talent in the kitchen. However, a dining experience is about more than just food. It's about how a guest is treated from the moment they step through the door, and on that front, Monarch Bistro failed spectacularly. The question is not about reservations or policies. The question is about respect, and in this case, respect was glaringly absent. Fine dining should elevate its patrons, not diminish them. Unfortunately, Monarch Bistro's actions left a sour taste that no dish, no matter how expertly prepared, could erase. Stephen's hands shook as he scrolled down. The review had already amassed thousands of shares, with a growing number of comments demanding accountability. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #MonarchBias and #FoodCriticSpeaks. Even local news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. He slammed his hand on the desk, muttering under his breath. How could this have happened? Monarch's reputation was meticulously crafted over the years, built on the illusion of perfection. And now, with a few words, Christopher Ellis had unraveled it all. Downstairs, the staff began to notice the shift. The phone, once ringing off the hook with reservation requests, had grown eerily silent. Lauren scrolled through her own phone, her face pale as she read the article. "This can't be real," she whispered. Rebecca, the sous chef, leaned against the counter, reading the same piece. "It's real," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "And it's not wrong." Ethan, the waiter, scoffed. "Come on, it's one guy's opinion. It'll blow over." Rebecca shook her head. "Not when it's him. You don't understand. Christopher Ellis he's untouchable in this industry. If he says you're done, you're done." By the afternoon, the fallout was undeniable. Several patrons canceled their upcoming reservations, citing the article. One even left a scathing voicemail, calling the restaurant a bastion of snobbery and prejudice. Stephen's phone buzzed with texts from friends and colleagues, all asking the same question: "What are you going to do about this?" Stephen knew he had to act, but the weight of the situation was suffocating. Monarch Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a symbol of something far uglier than exclusivity. And unless he found a way to address it, his legacy, and his livelihood, might not survive the week. Stephen Harper paced the length of his office, his normally calm demeanor shattered. His assistant had tried to interrupt him twice, but he'd waved her off, unable to focus on anything other than the damning article and the fallout it had unleashed. Monarch Bistro's phone lines were eerily quiet, and his inbox was flooded with a mix of angry messages and media inquiries. By the end of the day, the restaurant's online reviews had tanked, dropping from a near-perfect 4.8 to a dismal 2.1 on multiple platforms. Comments poured in relentlessly. Bias has no place in fine dining. They don't deserve your money. Maybe they should learn to treat all their guests with respect. Stephen slumped into his chair, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he felt something he wasn't used to: powerlessness. His empire, built over a decade, was crumbling, and he knew exactly why. By the next morning, Stephen decided to take action. He drafted a statement to post on the restaurant's social media accounts. At Monarch Bistro, we have always strived to offer an exceptional dining experience to every guest. Recently, it has been brought to our attention that we failed in this mission. We deeply regret the incident described in Christopher Ellis's review and acknowledge that we fell short in upholding our values of inclusivity and respect. We are committed to learning from this and taking concrete steps to ensure it never happens again. Stephen read the statement aloud to himself. It felt sterile, corporate, detached from the gravity of the situation. He deleted it. For the first time, he realized that words alone wouldn't fix this. If he wanted to salvage the reputation of Monarch Bistro, he'd have to do something drastic. Later that day, Stephen called a staff meeting. The employees gathered in the dining room, their expressions ranging from nervous to indifferent. Lauren fidgeted with her phone while Ethan leaned casually against the bar. Rebecca, arms crossed, stood silently, waiting. Stephen cleared his throat, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "I'm sure you've all seen the article," he began, "and I'm sure you understand how serious this is." There were murmurs of agreement, though Lauren looked away, avoiding eye contact. Stephen continued, "I won't sugarcoat it. What happened at the door that night reflects poorly on all of us, but the truth is, this isn't just about one incident. It's about a culture that I allowed to grow here, and for that, I take full responsibility." Rebecca raised an eyebrow, her posture softening slightly. Ethan, however, crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "So, what's the plan?" he asked. "We just grovel and hope people come back?" Stephen shot him a sharp look. "The plan," he said, "is to start with an apology, a real one." The following morning, Stephen published a new post, accompanied by a video. "To Christopher Ellis and to anyone who has ever felt unwelcome at Monarch Bistro, I want to personally say I'm sorry. Our actions and inaction were wrong, plain and simple. Fine dining is about more than food. It's about creating an experience that makes every guest feel valued. We failed at that, and for that, I am truly sorry. We are implementing immediate changes, including staff training on bias and inclusivity, because respect and hospitality should be at the heart of everything we do." The video showed Stephen speaking directly to the camera, his voice steady but his eyes heavy with regret. It was raw, unpolished, and authentic. Within hours, the post gained traction, with some commenters praising the effort while others remained skeptical. Still, one thing was clear: Stephen was trying. But would it be enough? Determined to take it a step further, Stephen reached out to Christopher Ellis directly. Through the magazine's editor, he sent a heartfelt email requesting a meeting to apologize in person. Days passed with no response. Then, just when Stephen had almost given up hope, a short reply appeared in his inbox. "Thank you for your message. While I appreciate your efforts, I must respectfully decline your invitation. My stance remains unchanged. Respect is the foundation of hospitality, and it was absent when it mattered most. I hope this experience will inspire lasting change at Monarch Bistro and beyond." Stephen stared at the screen, the weight of the words sinking in. He had hoped for closure, for a chance to make things right. Instead, he was left with the harsh reality that some wounds couldn't be mended with a single apology. Weeks passed, and the once bustling Monarch Bistro was now a shadow of its former self. Reservations remained scarce, the dining room often filled with more empty chairs than guests. The staff, once confident in their roles, moved quietly through their shifts, avoiding the unspoken truth that hung heavy in the air. The fallout was more than just financial. It was personal. Rebecca, the sous chef, found herself reflecting often on the incident. In the quiet moments between plating orders, she thought about the man they had turned away, how his calmness masked a deeper message. It was never just about him getting a table, she muttered to herself one evening. It was about being seen, being respected. Meanwhile, Stephen Harper worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The fallout from Christopher Ellis's review had been brutal, but it forced him to confront truths he had long ignored. The exclusivity that once defined Monarch's allure now felt like a cage, a symbol of the very biases he'd been blind to. He attended workshops, brought in diversity consultants, and implemented mandatory training for all staff. These weren't quick fixes, but the beginning of a long, uncomfortable process. One Friday evening, the restaurant was quieter than usual. Only a handful of tables were occupied. But for Stephen, this felt like an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, guest by guest. He stood near the bar, observing the room, when Rebecca approached. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice hesitant. Stephen turned to see a man standing near the entrance. It wasn't Christopher Ellis, but someone else. A local community leader Stephen had invited to discuss partnerships aimed at making the restaurant more inclusive. Taking a deep breath, he walked over, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming," Stephen said, his tone earnest. "I want to do better. I want Monarch Bistro to be a place that welcomes everyone." The man smiled faintly, but didn't shake his hand right away. "It's a start," he said. "But words are one thing. Actions are another." Stephen nodded, understanding the weight of the statement. He knew that trust wasn't given freely. It had to be earned, one step at a time. Months later, Monarch Bistro was slowly finding its footing again. The dining room wasn't as full as it once was, but the guests who came seemed to linger longer, their laughter and conversation filling the space with warmth. Stephen noticed subtle changes among his staff, too. Lauren's sharp edges had softened, and Ethan, though still sarcastic, had become more thoughtful in his interactions. Rebecca, ever steady, had stepped into a more prominent role, her quiet conviction guiding the team. One evening, as Stephen closed the restaurant, he looked at the framed review that once hung on the wall. It had been removed after Ellis's article, leaving an empty space that now felt symbolic, a reminder of the lessons learned and the work still ahead. He thought about the critic's final words, the truth in them cutting but necessary. Respect is the foundation of hospitality. Monarch Bistro had failed that test, but Stephen was determined to rebuild on a stronger foundation, not of exclusivity, but of inclusivity and integrity. As he turned off the lights and stepped outside, the city hummed with life around him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time.